"Are you hungry?" the little girl asked, offering her school sandwich to the bruised stranger on the bench. 3 days later, security found him. He was a billionaire with amnesia. Nicholas Blake had everything a man could want: power, respect, money that rewrote the rules of consequence. At 37, he was the magnetic force behind Blake Tech Industries, one of the fastest growing tech empires on the planet. He was the face of innovation, always impeccably dressed, always composed, always in control. But lately, control had started to feel like a cage. That morning, he woke before dawn in a penthouse suite that overlooked the city skyline like a god's eye view of creation. But there was no peace in it. The endless calls, the meetings, the strategies, it all blurred. Even the women who had once fluttered around him like moths to flame had begun to feel like part of the machinery. Charming smiles, rehearsed laughs, empty dinners. He needed air, silence, something real. Nicholas canceled his schedule, ignored the dozens of texts from his assistant, and slipped into one of his less noticeable cars. A plain black sedan, untracked, unmarked, and drove. For hours. No driver, no security, no destination. He didn't stop until the city gave way to fields, and the fields gave way to a quiet town he didn't even know the name of. Somewhere anonymous. Somewhere with a single main street, a rusted bus stop, and an old-fashioned coffee shop with sun-faded lettering that simply read, Joe's. It was still early. The town hadn't fully woken up. The sky was gray-blue, and the streets were mostly empty except for the occasional jogger or delivery truck. Nicholas pushed open the door to the coffee shop, the bell above chiming with a soft, nostalgic ring. He stepped inside. The smell of fresh pastries and burnt coffee wrapped around him like an old memory. For a brief moment, he wasn't a billionaire. He was just a man looking for warmth. He ordered a black coffee, declined the muffin offered by the older woman behind the counter, and moved toward the corner table. That's when it happened. He didn't see them enter. No warning, no sound. Suddenly, 3 men in dark clothes and masks burst through the rear exit of the shop. The first tackled Nicholas before he could stand. The others followed fast. One grabbed his arm, twisting it behind his back. Another jammed something sharp and cold against his ribs. No one screamed. No one helped. It happened too fast. He fought. Of course he did. But the fight was unfair from the start. They beat him hard. Disabling blows meant to send a message. One of them hissed into his ear, "You think you're untouchable?" They dragged him out the back into an unmarked van waiting in the alley. The rear doors slammed shut behind them. Darkness swallowed him. He didn't know how far they drove. It felt like hours, though it was likely only minutes. Time stretched between the pain and the blur of motion. He heard them talking, mentioning stocks, access codes, executive control. This wasn't just a robbery, it was corporate warfare. Inside the van, someone struck him again, just above the temple. His vision blurred, and something warm trickled down his cheek. He tasted iron. Then everything went still. He must have blacked out, because when he came to, he was no longer in the van. He was outside, lying on gravel, his suit torn, his hands scraped. It was late afternoon. The sun hung low in the sky like a dying ember. His vision flickered as he forced himself to stand. He stumbled forward, step by broken step, through unfamiliar back streets of an unfamiliar town. His thoughts were fog. Who was he? Where was he going? Why couldn't he remember anything? He walked for what felt like hours, guided by instinct, by the flicker of light, by the strange, sickening sense that he was someone important. But no longer. By the time dusk fell, he was sitting on a park bench near a small elementary school. He didn't know how he got there. He didn't know his name. His mind was a shattered mirror. All he had was pain and the overwhelming feeling of being lost. And that's when he heard her voice for the first time. Soft, curious, kind. "Are you okay?" He looked up, eyes glazed, vision still hazy. Standing before him was a small girl in a blue denim jumper, her brown eyes wide and honest. She couldn't have been more than 10. She studied him for a long moment. This stranger in a dirty light suit, bruised and broken, and then reached into her backpack. She pulled out a sandwich wrapped in a paper towel. Carefully, she extended it toward him. "My mom made it for me," she said, "but you look like you need it more." He blinked, and in that moment, without knowing her name or his, Nicholas Blake took the sandwich with shaking hands. And the course of his life quietly, irrevocably changed. The sandwich felt heavy in his hands, like more than just bread and cheese wrapped in a napkin. It felt like an offering from a different world, one where things were simple, one where kindness didn't have a reason behind it. He stared at it, as though unsure whether it was real or part of whatever fractured dream his brain was struggling to rebuild. His fingers were scraped, his nails dirty, his once immaculate light suit, now stained with blood and dust, barely clung to his body in one piece. He was hunched on the bench like a broken man. But the little girl didn't flinch. She stood before him, small and unafraid, in her blue denim jumper. Her brown eyes, large and watchful, studied him with a strange mix of curiosity and compassion. Two things he hadn't seen directed at him in a very long time. "You're not from here," she said plainly, like she wasn't asking. He shook his head, then stopped halfway, because he didn't know if that was true. "I don't know where I'm from," he said quietly, his voice hoarse from dryness. "I can't remember." She frowned, not out of fear but concern. Her little backpack shifted on her shoulders as she took a step closer, her shoes crunching gently on the gravel path. "You got hit in the head?" she asked. "Maybe. Do you know your name?" A pause, his brows furrowed. His lips parted, and nothing came out. The silence between them grew louder. She nodded like she understood, then handed him a juice box from the side pocket of her backpack. "You look thirsty." He took it, clumsily poking the straw in with fingers that trembled slightly. The cold apple juice tasted like something from another life. It made his chest hurt in a way he couldn't explain. "What's your name?" he asked her after a moment. "Sophie," she said proudly. "Sophie Myers. I'm 10. I go to elementary school down the road. This is my shortcut." He nodded slowly. "Sophie, do you want me to get a teacher?" she asked. "Or the police?" A strange flash of fear hit him, sharp and instinctive. He didn't know why, but his entire body went stiff at the mention of police. He shook his head. "No," he said quickly. "No. Please, just not yet." She looked him over again. He could tell she was thinking. "Hard. My mom says we don't give food to strangers," she said matter-of-factly. "But she also says real kindness means helping when no one's watching." Nicholas tried to smile. It didn't quite reach his eyes, but Sophie grinned anyway. "She's a nurse," she added proudly. "She helps people like you all the time. Maybe you should go to the hospital." "I'm fine," he said instinctively. "You're definitely not," she countered. That made him chuckle, genuinely this time. It surprised them both. "Where is your mom now?" he asked. "She's at work. I go home by myself sometimes. Our house is over there, behind the bakery." He followed her finger. Small houses lined the horizon in neat rows, each with their own tiny yard and porch. Lights were starting to flicker on as the sun lowered itself behind the hills. Street lamps buzzed to life one by one. "Do you need somewhere to stay?" she asked after a while. He didn't respond. She nodded again, as if she was the adult in this conversation. "Well, I can't take you home. Mom would freak out. But maybe you can stay here. There's a shelter near the fire station. It's not fancy, but they have pillows." Nicholas closed his eyes for a moment, suddenly overwhelmed by the swirl of sensations. Pain, gratitude, exhaustion. "I don't want to get you in trouble," he whispered. "You won't," she said. Another pause. "You remind me of someone," she added softly. He looked at her again. "My dad. He left a few years ago. You're taller, but your eyes are sad like his were before he left." His throat tightened. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. She shrugged in that way only kids can. Too used to loss, too young to fully understand it. "It's okay. We're fine now. Mom works a lot, but we're okay. She makes the best sandwiches." He looked down at the half-eaten one in his hand. "She really does." They sat there together in silence. The wind picked up slightly, rustling the leaves overhead. The town felt safe, hidden, untouched by whatever ugliness had thrown him into the dirt. "Are you sure you'll be okay here?" she asked one last time, her eyes filled with that strange, weighty concern again. "I'll try," he said. She reached into her backpack one more time and pulled out a granola bar. "Just in case," she said. And then, like it was nothing at all, she waved goodbye and headed down the path toward home, her small figure disappearing between the trees, the edge of her denim jumper swaying with each step. Nicholas sat still for a long time after she left. No one had ever looked at him like that before. Like he wasn't something powerful or dangerous or rich, just someone who needed help. And the strangest part of all, he hadn't known how much he needed to be seen like that until it happened. The sky had turned dark by the time Nicholas realized he could no longer feel his hands. His body was shutting down in ways he didn't fully understand. Subtle at first, the numbness in his fingertips, the fog blurring his sight, the slow crawl of cold air settling into his bones like winter creeping under a door. The sandwich was long gone, and the juice box sat empty beside the bench. His head throbbed with each heartbeat, the dried blood at his temple cracking every time he moved. He had tried to stand once, to find the shelter Sophie mentioned, but his legs buckled beneath him. The gravel bit into his palms as he caught himself. The dizziness was worse now. Not just exhaustion, but something deeper. Maybe from the head wound, maybe from dehydration, maybe from the panic he'd kept buried for hours. He leaned back against the bench and closed his eyes, trying to disappear into the night. That's when the black SUVs pulled in. They didn't roar up like a movie rescue. They moved with precision, silent, dark, almost invisible. Nicholas barely registered them until a voice crackled softly from somewhere above him. "Sir, can you hear me?" He opened one eye. A blurry silhouette came into view. Large, armored, armed. Another man approached, kneeling beside him. "Nicholas Blake?" Nicholas blinked. The name hit something in his chest. Recognition, like a forgotten note from a long song. Yes," he croaked. Immediately, the security detail moved into action. One pulled out a biometric scanner. Another reached for a trauma kit. Nicholas flinched instinctively, but they were careful, trained, gentle even. "We've been tracking you for 36 hours, the man said. "The chip in your left wrist pinged a signal just before sunset. We couldn't risk going public. Too much exposure." Nicholas tried to process the words, but they felt far away. "You're safe now," the man added, his voice softer. "We're taking you to a hospital." He blacked out before they even lifted him. The ambulance arrived at a small-town hospital just 15 minutes later. Modest on the outside, overworked on the inside. The ER buzzed with quiet urgency. Fluorescent lights flickering, wheels rolling, monitors beeping. A child coughed in one room. An elderly woman prayed softly in another. And in the center of it all, Emily Myers, 35, moved like calm water through chaos. She was tired. 3 double shifts in 4 days. Her hair was pulled back into a low bun, a few stubborn strands framing her face. The pale blue scrubs didn't hide her figure, nor did the exhaustion dull her striking presence. Her eyes, still sharp and icy blue, held warmth, a quiet strength earned from years of caring more than she ever should have. She didn't complain. She never had time to. So, when the trauma call came through about a non-local male, approximately 35-40, head injury, signs of exposure, and severe disorientation, she did what she always did. Washed her hands, snapped on gloves, and prepared the room. When the doors burst open, Emily turned and froze. The man they wheeled in was bruised, bleeding, and covered in filth. But there was something about him. Not just his features. Handsome, though battered, but the way his body carried itself, even unconscious. Elegant, as if he didn't belong in this kind of pain. "Who is he?" she asked as they lifted him onto the bed. "Client name is Nicholas Blake," one of the men said. "Corporate, CEO of Blake Tech Industries." Emily's mouth parted slightly. She'd heard the name. Everyone had. Billionaire. Genius. Too big for this hospital. Too powerful for this town. And yet, here he was. "Vitals are erratic," said the EMT. "Possible concussion, bruised ribs. He hasn't spoken much." "I'll take it from here," she said, regaining her rhythm. She moved fast, checking his breathing, inspecting the wound near his hairline, wiping dried blood from his temple. Underneath the grime, she saw traces of something else. A man who once lived a very different life. She finished cleaning the gash and covered it. His heart monitor beeped steadily now. And then, unexpectedly, his eyes opened. She leaned closer. "Mr. Blake?" she said gently. He blinked, unfocused. "You're in a hospital," she continued. "You were found outside, injured. You're safe now." He looked at her for a long moment, eyes darting across her face as if searching for something. Then in a hoarse whisper, "Your daughter, Sophie." Emily froze. She straightened. Her hands, still gloved, hovered in the air. "What did you say?" He blinked again, and tears welled in the corners of his eyes. Not dramatic, not performative. Quiet, raw. "She gave me a sandwich." Emily stepped back in disbelief, her heart thudding. "That was you?" He nodded weakly. Emily swallowed hard, unsure what to do with the sudden rush of emotion. She thought of Sophie that morning, cheerfully telling her she'd given away her lunch to a nice lost man in a fancy coat. She thought nothing of it, just her daughter's endless compassion. And now, that man was lying in front of her, broken, alone. And not just anyone. Nicholas Blake, the man who could buy this entire hospital 10 times over, brought low by something no one could have predicted. She didn't know what fate had just landed in her lap, but she suddenly realized this wasn't an accident. This was a collision of worlds, of lives, of something neither of them could explain yet. She reached for his hand and said quietly, "You're safe now. We'll take care of you." He gripped her hand faintly and whispered, "I remember now." And for the first time since the attack, Nicholas Blake closed his eyes not in fear, but in peace. Nicholas awoke to the soft beeping of a monitor, a dull ache, pulsing at the base of his skull. The sterile scent of antiseptic clung to the air, and for a moment he lay there staring at the ceiling tiles, blank and still. Then the memories came, not like a flood, but like flickers of light in a dark room, one by one, small and startling. The coffee shop, the masked men, the van, the gravel scraping his palms, the sandwich, the girl. His throat tightened. Sophie. He turned his head slightly and saw the IV in his arm. The light in the room was low but warm. Late afternoon, judging by the shadows. The pain in his ribs throbbed with every breath, but it was manageable now, dulled by medication. He felt like he'd been hit by a truck, but he was alive. More than alive, he was remembering. The curtain by the bed rustled slightly, and a soft voice spoke before the figure appeared. "You're awake." He recognized the voice before he saw her. Emily stepped into view, dressed in a fresh pair of navy blue scrubs, her hair now down, loosely tucked behind her ears. She looked different than she had the night before. More rested, but still carrying that same calm presence that made the chaos around her feel like background noise. "You were out for nearly 24 hours, she said, checking the IV and adjusting the monitor. "Mild concussion, broken rib, some nasty bruising, but nothing permanent." He watched her quietly. There was something grounding in the way she moved. Efficient, focused, but gentle. "You're Emily," he said slowly. His voice was hoarse but steady. "Sophie's mother." She looked at him, surprised. "You remember?" He nodded. "Not everything, but enough." He closed his eyes for a moment. "Your daughter, she gave me her lunch. No one's ever done something like that for me." Emily smiled faintly, but it was sad, distant. "She does that. She gives away the things I worry she might need for herself." There was a beat of silence between them. "I didn't know who I was," he continued, "not even my name. But when she spoke to me, when she handed me that sandwich, it was like something started clicking back into place." He looked down at his hands. "I remember things now. My name, my company, my life. But I still can't wrap my head around what happened." Emily didn't push. She sat down in the chair beside his bed, folding her hands in her lap. "You don't have to explain," she said. "But if it helps to talk, I'm a good listener." He hesitated, then nodded slowly. "I was ambushed. In a coffee shop. I don't know who sent them yet, but it was professional. Organized. They didn't want ransom. They wanted to break me. I escaped somehow. Don't even remember how. Next thing I knew, I was wandering around your town like a ghost." He let out a slow breath. "I'm not used to being powerless. It's not something I've felt in years." Emily studied him. "Sometimes it takes losing everything to realize what we've been carrying." He met her gaze. There was something in her tone, something that told him she wasn't just speaking about him. "Is that what happened to you?" he asked gently. Emily hesitated, then nodded. "Sophie's father died when she was 6. Car accident. No drugs, no alcohol. Just a tired man on a rainy road. Her voice didn't waver, but her eyes dimmed. We had no money, no insurance, no backup plan. Just bills and a little girl who suddenly needed me to be everything at once. Nicholas's chest ached, not from the injury, but from the weight of her story. I took a job here. Small town, stable hours. It's not glamorous, but it's safe. And I needed safe. She smiled softly. She's the best thing that ever happened to me, and I still worry I'm not enough. He stared at her. This woman who had spent her entire adult life sacrificing without applause, without headlines. She'd faced tragedy, debt, loneliness, and still found the strength to raise a child who saw a stranger on a bench and offered him her only meal. You're more than enough, he said, his voice quiet. And she's proof of that. Emily looked down at her hands, clearly caught off guard. Her fingers twisted slightly in her lap. You don't have to say that just because I cleaned your wounds. I'm not, he said simply. I've been surrounded by people my whole life. People who chase power or status or whatever they think I can give them. And in one day, your daughter gave me something I didn't know I was missing. She glanced up. Hope, he added. A reason to believe that maybe I'm more than what I built. For a long moment, they just sat in the soft hum of the hospital room, the air between them fragile but open. Finally, Emily stood, brushing a hand down the front of her scrubs. She'll be thrilled to know you're okay. She made me promise to call the hospital after school. I didn't tell her who you were, just that the man she helped was safe now. Nicholas nodded. I'd like to thank her. Properly. Emily hesitated, then smiled. A real, full smile that reached her tired eyes. I think she'd like that. She reached the door, then paused. For what it's worth, I'm glad you ended up on that bench. Nicholas swallowed. Me too. As she slipped out of the room, he leaned back against the pillow, the ache in his ribs sharp but manageable. For the first time since the attack, he didn't feel like a man who had lost control. He felt like a man who had been rerouted, interrupted by kindness, by fate, by a sandwich from a little girl with a brave heart, and a mother who might just be the first person to truly see him. And he was starting to realize he didn't want to disappear back into the life he had before. Nicholas was discharged from the hospital 3 days later, though not without protest from the medical staff. His ribs were still healing, the bruises on his body deep and slow to fade, and the concussion symptoms hadn't completely resolved. But he insisted. He needed fresh air, real light, and something more than endless fluorescent ceilings and painkillers. The security team wanted to take him back to the city immediately. They had a private jet standing by, a driver, lawyers, crisis managers, a list of updates longer than a novel. The media hadn't caught wind of the incident yet, something his PR team was handling with careful suppression, but that silence wouldn't last. They needed him back at headquarters, and fast. He said no. He told them he needed more time to think, that he wasn't ready to re-enter that world yet. Not until he figured out why he felt like it no longer belonged to him. Instead, he rented a small 2-bedroom guest house on the edge of town. Quiet, simple. It had creaky floors and a chipped countertop. The shower had to be jiggled to turn on. He loved it. He didn't tell anyone in the company where he was staying, not even his assistant. Mason, his head of security, stayed close by but gave him space. Clearly confused by the sudden shift in his boss, once driven by ambition, now sitting on back porches and sipping black coffee in silence. On his first morning out of the hospital, Nicholas walked to the town's bakery. He bought fresh croissants and a small bouquet of wildflowers from the market next door. Then, unsure of his own nerves, he made his way to a modest white house behind the bakery. Its small porch decorated with wind chimes and a child's hand-painted sign that read, "Welcome, but wipe your feet." He knocked once. Emily opened the door in jeans and a plain cotton blouse. She looked surprised, but not unpleasantly so. "You found us," she said with a small smile. "I brought breakfast," he replied, holding up the bag and flowers like a peace offering. She looked down at them, amused. "Not many billionaires knock on my door with croissants." "I'm not really a billionaire here," he said. "Here, I'm just a guy who owes your daughter his life." Before she could reply, Sophie came barreling down the hallway behind her. "You're out," she shouted, launching herself toward him. Nicholas crouched slightly, catching her in a careful hug, mindful of his ribs. Her energy was infectious. and for the first time in weeks, he laughed without effort. "I promised I'd thank you properly," he said, handing her the bouquet. "These are for you." She sniffed them dramatically. "Smells like a picnic." They invited him in, and soon the three of them sat around the small kitchen table, passing jam and pouring orange juice. The conversation was easy. Sophie talked nonstop, telling stories about school, the neighbor's cat, a talent show she was preparing for. Nicholas listened intently, occasionally asking questions, always smiling. Emily watched him. It wasn't the way he looked at Sophie that struck her. It was the way he listened, with attention, with patience, as if every word mattered. It was something Sophie hadn't had from a male figure since her father passed. And Nicholas didn't do it out of guilt or obligation. It felt natural. After breakfast, Sophie went outside to draw chalk shapes on the sidewalk. Emily washed the mugs in the sink. Nicholas stood beside her, drying the plates with a towel that was too small for the job. "I think she's adopted me," he said with a smile. "She doesn't trust easily," Emily replied, her tone softer now. "But she knows good people when she sees them." Nicholas looked at her. She didn't meet his eyes. "Can I ask you something?" he said. "Sure. Do you think I'm crazy for staying here? For not going back right away?" Emily dried her hands slowly, then leaned back against the counter. "I think when something traumatic happens, your soul tries to catch up with your body. Sometimes it needs quiet to do that." He nodded thoughtfully. "She's been through so much," he said, glancing toward the window, where Sophie was drawing a large heart on the sidewalk. "And yet she still has room to be kind. That's because she was raised by someone who taught her love doesn't run out." Emily looked down, startled by her own emotion. "She saved you, but you gave her something too." "What do you mean?" "She came home different that day. Lighter. Like she'd done something that mattered. Like her kindness had made a dent in the world." Nicholas's throat tightened. "I think she made a dent in me too." They stood in silence for a moment, the kind of silence that's filled with unspoken weight. Then Nicholas turned to her, more serious now. "I want to help, not just say thank you and vanish. I want to do something meaningful. For her, for you, for this town even." Emily shook her head gently. "You don't owe us anything." "I know. That's why it means something." She looked at him, really looked at him this time. Not the man from the news, not the patient in a hospital bed, but the one standing here, in her kitchen, drying dishes, trying to understand how his entire life had been real and hollow all at once. And it was in that moment she realized he wasn't trying to impress her. He was trying to start over. She reached into the drawer, pulled out a second dish towel, and handed it to him. "Well then," she said, "start by drying the forks." Nicholas smiled. That afternoon, he sat with Sophie on the porch, drawing stick figures and playing ridiculous word games she invented on the spot. Emily watched them from the window as sunlight spilled across the yard, and for the first time in what felt like forever, she allowed herself to imagine a different kind of future. One that didn't just involve survival. One that maybe, even just maybe, involved love again. And as Nicholas laughed at something Sophie said and nearly dropped his glass of lemonade in the process, she realized something else. Maybe he wasn't the one being saved. Maybe they all were. It had rained all afternoon, the kind of rain that didn't pour but whispered. Soft, steady, rhythmic. It blurred the edges of the world, turned sidewalks into mirrors, and brought a stillness over the small town that made everything feel suspended. By early evening, the clouds began to lift, leaving behind a sky streaked with lilac and pale gold. Nicholas sat on the front porch of Emily's house, a blanket draped over his shoulders and a hot mug of tea in his hands. The bruises on his ribs had started to fade, but they still tugged when he moved too quickly. The pain didn't bother him as much as the quiet did, not because it was empty, but because it gave him too much time to think. He was no longer just recovering from an attack. He was recovering from a life. From years spent racing towards something that no longer made sense. From people who smiled when he entered a room but disappeared the second he stopped being useful. From deals and power and the endless rush of achievement, none of which had ever felt like peace. Inside, Emily was folding laundry on the couch while Sophie worked on a school project at the dining table. They'd invited him to dinner again, without ceremony or obligation, just as naturally as if he'd always belonged there. He couldn't stop watching them. The way Emily gently separated socks and shirts like it was a meditation. The way Sophie asked her mother questions in a soft voice. Like she already knew the answers, but liked hearing them said out loud. The way the house felt lived in, warm, real. He didn't belong here. And yet, he did. Emily came outside a few minutes later, drying her hands on a dish towel. She wore a worn gray hoodie and leggings, her hair pulled up into a messy bun. No makeup, no effort. She was still the most beautiful woman he'd seen in years. "You look lost in thought," she said, settling into the chair beside him. "I'm always lost here," he replied. "But it's a good kind of lost." She smiled gently and wrapped her arms around her knees, pulling them up to her chest. For a while, neither of them said anything. The crickets had started singing. The air smelled like wet grass and pavement. "Do you ever miss it?" he asked eventually. "The life before?" Emily tilted her head. "You mean before Sophie? Or before the hospital and you?" He shook his head. "Before all of it. The dreams you had that never happened." She thought about that. "Sometimes," she said, "I thought I'd travel, do something big, maybe study medicine. I was accepted into a program once. But then life came in and rewrote the script." "Do you regret it?" "No," she said immediately. "Not even a little. I lost a lot when her father died. But Sophie isn't part of that loss. She's the reason I didn't stay broken." Nicholas took a sip of his tea, letting her words settle. "I built a life that looked perfect from the outside," he said. "Jets, penthouses, news articles with my name in bold. And now, the thing I keep thinking about the most is the way Sophie handed me that sandwich." He looked at Emily. "It was the first time in years I felt human." Emily's expression softened. Her eyes searched his face, not for a weakness to fix, but for a truth to understand. "Most people wouldn't admit that," she said. "I don't want to be most people anymore." There was silence again, but this time it wasn't empty. It was full of unspoken things, of things too new to name. Then very softly he said, "You scare me." Emily blinked. "Me?" "You and Sophie," he said, his voice steady but quiet. "You feel like something real, something I didn't know I wanted, and I'm terrified of wanting it. Because if I lose it, I don't know if I'll ever come back from that." Emily looked down at her hands, then up at him again. "I'm scared too," she admitted. "I don't trust easily. I don't let people in. Not because I don't want to, but because I've learned what happens when people leave, or lie, or disappear." She paused. "But you haven't done any of those things." "Not yet." Nicholas turned toward her fully now. The sky was dimming fast. The porch light flickered on. "Do you want me to leave?" "No," she whispered. "I don't." And then it happened. Not in a dramatic sweep, not like something out of a movie. It was soft, tentative, unsure. He reached out and touched her hand, and she let him. His fingers curled around hers. Warm, solid. She didn't pull away. "I don't know what this is," he said, eyes on the horizon, "but it's the only thing that's made sense to me in a long time." "I don't know either," she replied, "but I think I want to find out." She leaned her head on his shoulder, and he rested his cheek lightly against her hair. Inside, Sophie had finished her project and was standing in the doorway, silently watching them. She smiled to herself and tiptoed away. Back on the porch, the stars began to appear, one by one, quietly, confidently. And for the first time in his life, Nicholas Blake didn't feel like a man building an empire. He felt like a man finding home. The days that followed fell into a rhythm that Nicholas had never known before. It wasn't structured by meetings or dictated by market shifts. There were no urgent calls, no boardroom agendas, no high-rise noise echoing off cold glass windows. Instead, there was morning sunlight pouring through sheer curtains. There were eggs sizzling on a cast-iron pan. There were messy ponytails, crayon doodles on the fridge, and stories told over second cups of coffee. Nicholas wasn't a guest in the Myers house anymore. He had become something else. Not quite a permanent fixture, but not a visitor either. Every morning he walked from his rented cottage 2 blocks away and arrived just after Sophie had gotten dressed for school. She'd open the door with a grin and announce, "He's here," as if he were a secret hero returned from some mission only she understood. He began taking her to school. Not every day, Emily insisted on rotating. but often enough that Sophie now looked for him out the window of her classroom when the final bell rang. They talked about everything on the walks, why marshmallows shouldn't be allowed in cereal, whether the sky had a name, what she'd do if she were president. He listened to every word like it was gold, and for Sophie, that was everything. One evening, after dinner and homework, and the usual chaos of bedtime, Nicholas stayed a little longer. Emily was sitting on the porch steps in a sweatshirt and leggings, her hair damp from a shower. She looked tired but peaceful, the kind of tired that came from a full day of giving and not resenting a second of it. Nicholas stood in the doorway, unsure for a moment. Then he stepped outside and sat beside her. "Sophie's asleep?" he asked. Emily nodded. Finally, she made me read the same paragraph 3 times just so she could stall bedtime. "She's clever," he said, smiling. "She's impossible," Emily said, smiling too. "But yeah, clever." Nicholas glanced at her. Her face was illuminated by the porch light, soft shadows, smooth skin, those electric blue eyes that still caught him off guard. "I think about it a lot," he said, his voice low. "That day on the bench. What if she hadn't stopped? What if she had just walked past?" Emily turned toward him. "She wouldn't have. It's not in her." He nodded. "I believe that now." Silence lingered for a moment. Then quietly she said, "You know she talks about you like you're already part of us." Nicholas blinked. "Does that bother you?" Emily looked down at her hands folded in her lap. "No, it scares me maybe, but not because of you, because she's never had anyone stick around." He was quiet for a long time. Then, "I'm not going anywhere." "I want to believe that," she said, still not looking at him. "But I've had to rebuild from too many promises." Nicholas turned slightly, gently brushing his fingers against hers on the step. She didn't pull away. "You don't have to believe anything yet," he said. "I'll just keep showing up." They sat like that for a while, hand to hand, saying nothing else. And in that silence, something unspoken passed between them. Not a confession, not a declaration, just the steady heartbeat of something real growing between two people who had nearly forgotten how to trust it. The next morning it was pouring rain, heavy and wild, drenching the streets and turning gutters into rushing streams. Emily had to leave early for a double shift, and Nicholas offered to take Sophie to school. He showed up with a comically large umbrella and a backpack in one hand, trying not to slip on the driveway. "You look like a soggy businessman," Sophie shouted, giggling as he nearly lost his footing. "Great. Now I'm a soggy CEO," he said with mock offense. They walked to school with Sophie hopping over puddles and Nicholas holding the umbrella high above her. At the school gate, she hesitated. "Hey," she said suddenly, turning serious. He looked down. "What's up? Are you my dad now?" The question hit him like a freight train, not because it was unexpected, but because she asked it with such innocent clarity, like she wasn't hoping or wishing, but simply trying to understand what had changed in her world. Nicholas crouched down so they were eye level. His suit pants were already soaked, but he didn't care. "I don't know what the right words are yet," he said honestly, "but I care about you. A lot. And I care about your mom. And I want to be here, every day if you'll let me." Sophie considered this, then gave a slow, serious nod. "Okay, then I'm going to call you Dad. And if Mom says no, I'll just say I already made up my mind." Nicholas laughed, surprised and moved all at once. "Deal." She hugged him quickly, then turned and ran inside, her boots splashing through the puddles like she was chasing the rain. Nicholas stood in the storm a while longer, heart pounding, hands trembling. Not from fear, but from something deeper, something that felt terrifying and permanent and good. Later that night, Emily came home late. Nicholas was still there, sitting at the table with a reheated casserole waiting. Sophie had fallen asleep on the couch with a blanket tucked under her chin and a book in her lap. "She asked me a question today," he said as Emily stepped out of her coat. "Oh," she said, curious but tired. "She asked if I'm her dad now." Emily froze, then met his gaze. "What did you say?" "I said I didn't know what the right words were, but I told her I'm not going anywhere." Emily's expression shifted, softened. She walked over and sat down across from him. "She called you Dad in her sleep," she whispered. "She's never done that before." Nicholas reached across the table and took her hand. Neither of them spoke, but they didn't need to, because the truth was already alive between them, steady and sure. He wasn't a visitor anymore. He was family. The leaves had just begun to turn. A whisper of gold brushed the edges of the trees along the sidewalks, and early autumn curled itself gently around the little town like a favorite blanket. There was something in the air now, a sense of shifting, of change that was no longer uncertain but quietly welcomed. Nicholas had stayed, longer than anyone expected, longer than even he expected. What began as a few cautious days turned into weeks, and then into a new kind of life entirely. He'd converted part of the guest house into a home office. Not sleek and modern like his old world, but practical and quiet, with bookshelves, a sturdy wooden desk, and the scent of fresh paper and warm coffee always in the air. He still ran his company, of course. Blake Tech wouldn't stop without him. But now his hours were different. His pace was different. He took morning calls only after walking Sophie to school. He made business decisions not from a corner office high above the skyline, but from a kitchen table where crayon drawings sometimes sat beside quarterly reports. Emily noticed the shift in him every day. The man who once lived inside the sharp lines of headlines and wealth had softened, not weakened, but opened. He laughed more. He listened differently. He made space in every room he walked into, and never once asked to be praised for it. Sophie noticed too. She left little notes on his desk sometimes. "Good luck today," or "You got this," scribbled in messy handwriting. On Friday nights, they had movie night, complete with popcorn and all three of them squeezed together on the couch. Nicholas in the middle, always. He belonged. But still, he hadn't said it. Not out loud. Not to Emily. There were glances. Lingering silences. Hands brushing in the hallway. A kiss on the cheek that lingered too long. But the words that would make it real, remained unsaid. Until the night he stood at her front door again, dressed not in a suit, but in jeans and a dark sweater, holding a small velvet box in his pocket and a heart full of something deeper than fear. Emily answered the door in a long gray cardigan, her hair down, eyes tired from work but still impossibly bright. She looked at him like she knew something was coming. Not because of his expression, but because the space between them had been building toward this for days, maybe weeks. "Can we talk?" he asked softly. She stepped aside without a word and let him in. Sophie was asleep already. The house was quiet. Nicholas turned to face her in the living room, where the soft lamplight pooled around the worn edges of the couch, and the familiar creak of the floor made it feel like time had slowed just for them. "I've been thinking," he began, "about the kind of life I built, about how long I thought success meant being untouchable, unreachable, and how alone that made me, even when I didn't realize it." Emily didn't interrupt. She just listened, her arms folded across her chest gently, not guarded but grounded. "Then I woke up on a bench with blood on my shirt and no name in my mouth, and your daughter handed me a sandwich." He smiled, eyes flickering. "That one moment gave me more than anything I've ever earned in a boardroom. It gave me you. It gave me Sophie. It gave me a new direction." He stepped closer now, his voice steady. "I don't want to go back to my old life. I want to build a new one. With both of you, if you'll let me." He reached into his pocket and pulled out the box. Emily's breath caught. It wasn't flashy. It wasn't extravagant. A single diamond, delicate and timeless, held in a band of brushed gold. Simple. Like her. Like them. "I'm not offering you a mansion," he said, "or headlines or red carpets. I'm offering you everything real that I have. This house, this town, breakfasts, bedtime stories. Loving Sophie like she's mine, because in my heart, she already is." He opened the box. "And loving you for the rest of my life, if you'll let me." Emily's eyes brimmed. She didn't cry often, but this time the emotion rose too fast to stop. She pressed a hand to her mouth, nodded, and let out a trembling laugh. "Yes," she whispered, then louder, steadier. "Yes, of course, yes." He stepped forward, took her in his arms, and kissed her. Not with urgency, but with reverence. Like the moment had been waiting for them all this time. She wrapped her arms around his neck and held on like she never wanted to let go. They stood like that for a long time. Later, they sat on the couch, wrapped in a shared blanket, her head resting on his shoulder, his fingers tracing circles on her hand. "Do we tell Sophie in the morning?" she asked. "I have a feeling she already knows," he said. Sure enough, at breakfast the next day, Sophie walked into the kitchen, yawned, and said, "So, Are we officially a family now or what? Emily and Nicholas burst out laughing. Sophie beamed. That weekend, the three of them drove out to the hills and had a small ceremony beneath the trees. Just them, a few close friends from the hospital, and the sky full of gold. There were no reporters, no headlines, no press releases. But there was laughter, there were vows, and there was a promise made not in luxury, but in love. Nicholas Blake, once a name etched into magazines and mergers, became something entirely new. A husband, a father, a man not defined by what he built, but by what he chose to protect. A woman who had lost everything but gave her heart again. A little girl who had changed the world with a sandwich. And a family that began not in fortune, but in kindness. Because sometimes the smallest act of compassion isn't small at all. It's the beginning of everything. Some stories are about power. Some are about pain. But this one, at its heart, is about kindness. Quiet, instinctive, and often underestimated. The ending of The Sandwich of Fate isn't just a happy resolution. It's a full circle moment that reminds us the smallest actions can lead to the most extraordinary outcomes. The arc of Nicholas Blake, from a man who had everything but felt nothing, to someone who finds love, identity, and family in the unlikeliest place, is one of deep human transformation, and it doesn't come through grand redemption or high drama. It comes through vulnerability, through a sandwich, through a child's instinct to help a stranger. Emily, in many ways, is the emotional backbone of the story, strong, steady, and quietly resilient. She doesn't fall for a title or a suit. She learns to trust a man who proves, moment by moment, that he's not here to take, but to stay. And Sophie is the soul. She doesn't save Nicholas with knowledge or strength. She saves him with compassion, with courage, with the clarity only a child can have. What I love most about the ending is that it doesn't pretend life is perfect. It just shows that it's possible to build something better, something real, when people choose love over fear, truth over ego, and presence over performance. In the end, The Sandwich of Fate isn't just a love story. It's a reminder that who we become often starts with how we treat someone who can offer us nothing at all, and that the most important yes in life sometimes comes from a quiet front porch, a sleepy child, and a heart finally willing to stay.